Let's talk about winning back lapsed donors with Farrah Rooney. Hi, and welcome to Driven's Fundraising Superheroes podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Shishente, and as an innovator in nonprofit software, Driven is here to help you unlock your true fundraising potential. We would love to help you unlock the true power of your data and save hours in data management, so give us a visit at trustdriven.com if you'd like to learn more. Even the best nonprofits will have a few donors slip through the cracks. Donor relationships are all about give and take. So what do you do when you notice a donor is no longer responding to your communications as much as they used to? Well, you have to try and win them back. A lapsed donor is not a lost donor, and sometimes they just need a little love to maintain their interest in your organization. I am so happy to have Driven's Director of Partnerships, Farrah Rooney, on the show with us. She has been in the industry for over 15 years, working as a consultant, a strategist, and an events manager, and having worked closely with our clients to improve their fundraising experience with our donor management system. Farrah knows what goes into the donation process and how to retain donors. So thank you, Farrah, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So in your opinion, what is a lapsed donor? And what kind of qualifies them? How long do they have to be inactive for?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And ultimately, it depends on the organization. It depends on, their annual fundraising and marketing cycles and their segmentation plan. So, I mean, that's a sort of a vague answer, but we can get a little bit more specific. I mean, generally lapsed donors, supporters falls into sort of buckets. And they're sort of defined as like LBUT or LBUT or SBUT, I think something like that. Anyway, last year but not this year, or some year but not this year. And the some year but not this year, segment can go back, 2-3 years. It can go back 4 years, but it depends. So generally, that's how segmentations work. They say, okay, last year, but not this year, they get a specific message, then some year, but not this year, and they get a specific message. And then it can go back, if the organization has capacity and they have the data, the data in-house and ready to go, they can go 2 years, but not last year, or and they can get really detailed, but it ultimately depends. And testing is always important. But if you're just starting out, that whole last year but not this year, some year but not this year is a good place to start. As well, if the organization, your organization hasn't been doing any communication at all, or hasn't been trying to sort of win them back, really, you can go as far back as you sort of want to get started. So it depends, but you can kind of start there.
When you notice that you have a few donors that have been inactive, what do you do next? What do you recommend to nonprofits when they're trying to engage inactive donors?
Yeah, I mean, really, charities should always be looking at inactive and lapsed on sort of rolling timelines. So, I mean, definitely sort of going back to the first question, the first thing is to put them in those buckets. So if you're noticing, lapse, the first thing to sort of ask yourself is, okay, when did they donate last, right? Was it 2 years ago that they go in the some year, but not this year? Or if was it just last year, then they go in the last year, but not this year. And then the next thing that I would sort of recommend is to sort of do a little bit of a deeper dive and a little bit of a deeper analysis about when they last donated, how much they donated, were they a sustaining or annual, donor? Were they a one-time donor and they were sort of lapsed? And then from there, you can kind of segment and target your message back to capture them. So for example, if you look back and go, okay, last year or 2 years ago, we received a whole bunch of, first-time new donors off of a Giving Tuesday campaign or off of a holiday campaign. You could look back and try and re-engage them and send them an email at that specific time to say, or just before that specific time to say, hey, you supported us on Giving Tuesday last year. Giving Tuesday is coming up again this year. here's, all the way that your gift made a difference last year, and here's, the way that you can make a difference again next year, or holiday, and whatnot. So that's definitely one way to do it. Sort of look at the timing, and try and personalize your message to align with how they gave last year to get them going. Another thing to sort of think about too, is look at the size of their gift. Because if you're looking at somebody that has the potential to be a major donor, or somebody that was a major donor in the past, then you might want to be a bit more high touch with them, right? You might want to, hand them over to a board member, or a senior leader in your organization, to reach out and actually have a conversation with them, about their giving priorities, about their, just to say hi and see how they're doing. To check in on them, and it could be a soft conversation around, the work that your organization did over the next year, and just see if there's opportunities for alignment, perhaps in what their giving priorities are, or where they are, and what your organization sort of, is doing. I mean, there's tons and tons of really great resources and experts out there around major giving, and how to sort of re-engage those, or how to start those conversations. But definitely that is one tactic for your LAP supporters, if their giving potential is larger. The other thing, that I've done in the past that's been really sort of interesting is trying a sort of omnibus survey. So sending a survey out, and it can be sent out. I would definitely actually recommend, you're going to send out a survey to segment it by current and lapsed donors. You could even do ELBA, last year, or some year, and ask them, are you still giving? If you're not, why not? What made you stop? You could ask them what other charities they support, and you can really, get some interesting data from there. Particularly, there's ways that you can make the survey sort of anonymous, but you could still tie a code, or some sort of identifier to the email, and be able to sort of import that information into their record, so you can have sort of more information about that individual, or you can just aggregate the data and just determine sort of what's going on. So if you find that there's a lot of folks or LAP supporters that feel like they don't have capacity to give, you could be asking for smaller amounts to those individuals, right? Like, I wouldn't recommend doing that across the board, but if there is a segment that has indicated that they don't have capacity to give at the levels you've been asking, you can ask them to give less, right? Every bit helps. You could be more transparent about how their gift helps. I've received feedback from doing these surveys in the past where we found out that one of the reasons they stopped giving was just because they didn't hear from the charity at all, and they didn't know what was going on and how their gift was helping. So that would be a really great opportunity to start building out a more robust communication plan, and about their impacts. As well, if you're looking at another sort of segment, or depending again on the capacity of your organization, you could look at deepening engagement through, it could be giving events, special events. You can invite them to a donor event, or something like that once the world starts opening back up. Or you could even do virtual events too, right? So you could do things like town halls, virtual town halls. If you are an organization, like for instance, animal welfare groups, I know that I've done this. They've had town halls with lawmakers, or town halls with animal experts to provide some sort of content, or almost like content marketing, right? and get them to re-engage that way. And then there's some sort of, ask for, or at least you get them on their radar. You follow up with an ask 4 weeks later or something along those lines, and just see how they're doing. So there's lots of sort of different ways to sort of get that information and then get it into action to try to re-engage it. But there's some ideas right there.
So I'm curious to know, how often should organizations be dedicating time specifically to their labs donors? Is this something that should be ongoing, or maybe there's a time of the year that might be best to re-engage people who haven't given in a while?
Yeah, I'm going to offer another sort of vague answer, but ultimately it depends, right? Because you need to be sort of rolling it out, and always having sort of your lapsed re-engagement, or re-engagement for your lapsed supporters as part of your overall annual giving and fundraising plan, right? So, that could be annually in January, if it makes sense. If you are an organization that gets tons of supporters around a certain date, like perhaps you're an environmental organization, so Earth Day makes sense to try and re-engage. It's all just strategy. There's lots of different tactics you can use. And ultimately, the more personalized you can make it, the better. So understanding, and trying to gather, and look at the data that you have on them. Again, did they come in? Did they come in to an event? Like, what type of appeal did they respond to? Did they respond to an urgent appeal? Are they emergency? Are they the sort of supporters that respond to emergencies? And perhaps like those folks could be followed up a year later, talking about how you responded to that emergency, etc. There's all kinds of sort of things to be thinking about when looking at your full sort of program. But ultimately, personalization. The more targeted the ask is, the better. And trying to make sure that your data is clean and accurate, so you can go back and look at things like, language, tactics, donation level ask, timing, frequency. One story I love to tell is I used to work for a very large international social justice charity, and that works both domestically and internationally. And so I was just really curious for some of their monthly sustainers. And this is another thing to consider also, is geographically, like your donors in one part of the country might care about something in a very different way than another part of the country. Anyway, side note. But I was sort of curious as to, what appeals their sustainers, the majority of their sustainers were coming in through, and how that compared to the appeals that they were sending out. And what I was finding was that a large majority of their donors were actually coming through around domestic appeals. So they were caring about things that the charity was doing domestically. Yet the vast majority of their annual appeals and their communications was about their international work. And so my suggestion was that if they should be testing domestic appeals versus international appeals, and they could even break it down geographically, because I was finding that domestically there were sustainers that were very interested in certain parts of the country versus others, right? So even getting down, so if you're finding that you're seeing lapsed folks, and they're coming off a certain appeal, like a domestic appeal, but you're putting out asks around international campaigns, try and re-engage those folks using domestic messaging, or try and see what other supporters in that little geographic area sort of care about, and then try and sort of re-engage them that way. So that's just another way that yeah, some other tactics and things you could be looking at when you're sort of thinking about segmentation.
Yeah, segmentation is like key when it comes to this stuff. And you gave so many examples of looking at how they came into the organization, what they responded most to, and just their overall engagement can tell you so much about how you can re-engage them in the future. Are there any telltale signs with data that might indicate that this is like a lost cause, or that might indicate that the donor maybe
Not interested.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the best way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one thing definitely is to look at is open rates of emails. So, I mean, if they haven't opened an email for you, from you, sorry, in the last, I mean, you could even be generous depending on, again, your capacity, in the last year, in the last 2 years, I mean, not even opened an email, then I would say they've probably gone cold. And what I would even do, again, if you have capacity, before sort of inactivating them, is do a formal re-engagement email out to those folks and say, hey, we noticed you haven't opened an email from us in the last, in a while. Are you still interested in hearing from us? We'd be so sorry to see you go. By you, engaging with us, we're able to do all of this amazing work. But if you don't want to hear from us, we don't want to be clogging up your email, etc. So you could try something like that. There, people have had really great response from that. As well, I mean, even just on a technology level, looking at spam filters, spam traps, making sure that you're using best practices in your email delivery, and making sure the emails are actually getting to them. But yeah, I mean, ultimately looking at the open rate, looking at the action, the action rate, have they taken any action off an email? If they haven't done any action in the last year or 2 years, I mean, maybe you want to have open rates of 3 years and action rates of 2 years, and then do a reactivation campaign and then go from there. There's lots of different sort of things that you can do, but definitely I would say looking at your open rates, looking at your action rates, and just seeing if they've been clicking through and interacting with you guys at all.
Yeah. Do you find that email in terms of like re-engaging donors is usually the best way to approach it? Or are there other ways that nonprofits kind of reach out to those kind of cold members?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways. And I think it just depends again on capacity, and depends on, again, I sound like a bit of a broken record, right? And depends on what their segment is. If they are a lapsed monthly donor, and it makes sense, and you crunch the numbers, it makes sense financially, and you're working with a telemarketing group, for instance, then absolutely, there's no, a lot of organizations will provide a telemarketing group with, their lapsed donors, and get a great script together, and then invite the telemarketers to reach out and try and re-engage them. So that's a huge tactic. Tons of organizations employ that. Direct mail, also huge for lapsed, right? So there's, depending on your marketing mix and your campaign, and your campaign strategies, you could do any number, right? You could say, have a telemarketer phone a lapsed donor in week 1, and then 4 weeks later they get an email, as a little like teaser to a direct mail piece that you're going to drop. Then you drop a direct mail piece, then you do a follow-up with an email, right? Because there's tons of data around supporters donating online after they get a direct marketing piece in the mail, right? Or yeah. So direct marketing there's a science to it. There's all kinds of different tactics you can take. But again, depending on your capacity and your budget and your goals. An email is just sort of one of them, right? I mean, who knows, if you have found there's a whole bunch of lapsed donors in one geographic area, and you have a DRTV spot that is, proven really well, you can look at running DRTV in certain regions or certain areas too, right? So, or texting, or throwing an event, or there's all kinds of different things that you can be doing. Ultimately, it's the marketing mix that works for you. I mean, heck, digital advertising can be super segmented, right? So you could be looking at, dropping in your lapsed donor data into a custom Facebook or LinkedIn audience, and then look at serving, those individuals ads that have certain sort of lapsed language around it. So lots that you can do. Lots that you can do.
Oh, totally. We've talked a lot about strategies already, segmentation, just checking in, not being afraid to communicate what's going on, and, sending those emails. But are there any other tips that you would give to organizations to keep their supporters engaged and interested and donating?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think one thing is, don't be afraid to communicate often. I see a lot of organizations say they don't want to bother their supporters, they don't want to email too much, people get spammed. But I think that a lot of people's capacity for emails is much higher, I think, than charities or organizations think. You could just point to corporations that send emails often, and that they're not doing that unless it works, right? So, I mean, there's some companies that I literally get emails from daily, right? So I'm not suggesting that you send emails daily, but you could try weekly, right? You could even try bi-weekly, do 2 a month, right? See what happens. And you can monitor unsubscribe rates. So if you're seeing significant unsubscribe jumps, you can go, okay, you can pull back. I would be surprised if you did. But if that happens, I mean, and the other thing to just also not be afraid of is, if you do get a couple of, supporters complaining or emailing saying you're sending too many emails, don't sort of jump the gun and stop sending emails out. Don't worry if there are a couple of people that, respond back negatively, but the thousands of people that are getting emails aren't. So yeah, I would say just try and email more often. Don't be afraid to reach out weekly. The other thing, personalize as much as you can. Make sure your data is clean. Make sure, names are going out properly as much as you can. If you don't have a first name on file, make sure that there's a fallback, so it's not just being like, hi, blank space. Just like things like that, right? That sort of make it feel more personalized, even if it's like, hi, friend, or things like that. Make sure you're using right dates. And then, yeah, I mean, keep your supporters updated on impact. Let them know how their donations are making a difference, and how, partnering with you and supporting you will really change the world and change their communities. And yeah, so that's sort of three pieces there.
Well, thank you again, Farrah, for joining us on the show. And for those listening, you can learn more about re-engaging donors at trustdriven.com. There you can sign up for our newsletter, get the latest tips and tricks for fundraising, marketing, and more delivered straight to your inbox, and listen to past podcast episodes to really help you learn how to segment and engage your donors. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Fundraising Superheroes podcast.